let's try this again. I really just want to give y'all a history lesson about the history of broken treaties between the U.S. government and the Lakota Nation. So hopefully I can do this without turning into a wizard or a fox. But let's go ahead and get started. But I did the first leg of my ride today, and it was a lot of fun. And second leg tomorrow. But let's go ahead with our history lesson. And yes, I am reading from my computer because there's a lot of good information in here that I'm sure we didn't cover in AP US history, and I think it's important that we talk about it. So sit down, take notes, pay attention. So the first Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851, this was pretty much the U.S. government calling for the Big Council of 1951 at Fort Laramie. And this promised that if the Lakota signed a peace treaty, they'd be reimbursed with food and clothes and weapons and horses and gifts, so bribery. But this peace treaty was ultimately just asking them to not fight against the encroachment of white homesteaders and troops into the area. And also not to attack the Bozeman Road, which, or the Bozeman Trade, which was a trade route through the Lakota area. Now, on this trade route, eventually, of course, the military came and initially just set up forts for like trading posts, but these very quickly became military posts, and bringing in with them the cannons and guns. And this led to heightened tensions that eventually, and these guns, these cannons, the Gatlins, which were very innovative for the time and extremely destructive, because within minutes you could decimate an entire herd of buffalo, and then they turned them on people. So not fun when those came out. So this, within the year, this was broken by the U.S. government, and that didn't take them long to break their first promise. But the trouble really started in earnest. Those are hard words to say. In 1866, with the Powder River War that broke out between Red Cloud, and he had banded with the Lakota, I lost my place, the Lakota, the Cheyennes, and the Arapaho, so the Plains tribes, and then it was versus the U.S. troops. So the Lakota were ultimately told that the whites would stay out of the Black Hills, which is, or properly known as Pahasapa, which is extremely sacred land. It's where we are now, and it's very sacred. So with the second treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, this pretty much ended the Powder River War, again with false promises, and they started a new tactic of manipulation and turning tribes against each other. So they labeled the Lakota as either friendlies or hostiles, and ones that, you know, were complacent and came to the reservations, got their gifts, sort of played along. They were friendlies, and they were rewarded. Whereas the hostiles, the ones who said, no, these are our lands, like we shouldn't be reserved to these tiny areas, they were hostiles, and they were seen as hostiles by both their fellow tribesmen and the military. Hostiles including Crazy Horse, for example, who refused to give up on his home, these lands that rightfully belong, not past tense, belong to the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho people. So that was the second treaty of 1868, and they said, okay, fine, we'll stay out of the Black Hills. But that was quickly gone. That promise was quickly gone back on in 1874, when there was the rumor of gold in the Black Hills, and so Custer led an expedition, confirmed it, and very quickly whites swarmed to the areas, miners, troops to protect them, and so that treaty was broken. That's number 2. So then in 1875, the federal government tried to buy Pahasapa from the Lakota Nation, and they just straight up refused to show up to the meeting. They were just like, that's out of the question. So then in 1877, the Congressional Act of Yes. So the Congressional Act of 1877 violated the First and Second Fort Laramie treaties by requiring that the Lakota relinquish the Black Hills and 22.8 million acres of the surrounding territory. Now, land isn't just freedom. Land is access to hunting grounds for the buffalo, or Tatanka, and also freedom. So that 22 million in less than 20 years, and listen to this fact, in less than 20 years, the Lakota Nation shrunk from 134 million acres to less than 15 million acres in less than 20 years, between 1850, 1860, and 1890s. So then, as if they didn't take enough land, in 1889, after the Lakota refused to sell 9 million more acres of their land to the U.S. government, Congress passed the Sioux Act. Interesting note, I learned from an excellent autobiography on Crazy Horse, I believe. Maybe I learned this from Carol Goodfeather. I think maybe Carol, actually. So Sioux, which is what the Lakota are oftentimes called, is actually an Ojibwe word meaning snake. And so it wasn't a very nice term, but Sioux stuck because when Europeans and later Americans came, they came from the east, and so they met with the Ojibwe first, or the Chippewa, and the Chippewa were sort of like, yo, be careful of those Sioux out there on the plains, like there's some bad dudes. So Sioux is actually technically not the proper term. It would be Lakota, Dakota, I think Nakota, but the Lakota Nation. So, side note. So they refused to sell an additional 9 million acres, and so Congress passed the Sioux Act. The act therefore redefined the requested 9 million acres as surplus lands, meaning that it would be open to white settlement under the Dawes Act, and it divided the Lakotas into 5 separate reservations. These might sound familiar: Standing Rock, Pine Ridge, Cheyenne River, and the Upper and Lower Brule, or Brule. I think it's Brule. The remaining land was given to the new states of North and South Dakota. So the land that I am sitting on that should belong to the Lakota Nation, that is how the state of South Dakota was born. Any natives who refused to be confined to the reservations were deemed hostile and were pretty much ordered to arrest and shoot on sight. The 9 million acres was then opened up for public purchase for white ranchers and homesteaders, and we know how that ended up. Sturgis Rally. So, 1890, the Battle of Wounded Knee, Custer's last. Oh, okay, and we're back. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So, Battle of Wounded Knee, not Custer's Last Stand. Custer's Last Stand was the Battle of Little Bighorn. And we'll touch on that in a second when we talk about who is Custer. But I lost my notes. The Congressional Act, 1889. So, after the Lakota, 1890, found it. Battle of Wounded Knee. Shouldn't be called a battle because there was no... Alright, so we're back. Okay, Massacre of Wounded Knee. The military, who I believe was led by Harney, actually. I might be wrong on that. But anyway, the military was led to stop a ghost dance because the U.S. government said that you can't practice your culture. They have a habit of doing that. Was sent to stop a ghost dance, and they also attempted to unarm the tribe. Some resisted, and over 300 Lakota men, women, and children were killed. And then those troops were then rewarded with Congressional Medals of Honor for massacring a village. And that's disgusting. Okay, so, but fortunately the Lakota People's Law Group is working to get these medals rescinded and acknowledging that it was not a battle, but a massacre. So, who is Custer? Second lesson, and then we're going to wrap it up. But who is Custer? He was an Army officer and a cavalry commander in the U.S. Army. He graduated from the bottom of his class at West Point, so he wasn't even good, but the Civil War broke out, and they sort of took whatever they could get. But then after the Civil War, he headed west to fight in the Indian Wars. And so the rest I'm actually going to be quoting from Wikipedia because it was actually really interesting to find out how he got such a baller legacy when he was a a complete bastard and massacred. Okay, so his legacy was partially from his own fabrication and through his own journalistic efforts, and then also on heavy behalf of his widow, who wanted to make him out to be a war hero with lasting fame. So again, the public saw him as a tragic military war hero massacred in the West, and an exemplary gentleman who sacrificed his life for country. So it became, the Battle of Little Bighorn became one of the best known episodes of the American Indian Wars, due in part to the painting commissioned by, interestingly enough, Anheuser-Busch as part of an advertising campaign. The enterprising company reprints of a dramatic work that depicted Custer's last stand.
Yes.
Painting commissioned by Anheuser-Busch, and then it was hung in salons all over the country. No, saloons. Sorry, can you imagine little like call girls like getting the nails done, being like, "That's Custer's last stand right there. We go into the whorehouse tonight, and we're going to see Custer's last stand at the saloon as well." That's funny. Anyway, and so that was one of the reasons that it was fueled as being an American legacy. He also got a number of nods from Theodore Roosevelt, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. What a name. One person he did not get any respect from was President Grant, who acknowledged that his actions were unnecessary and his death was brought upon by himself. So there are a number of Custer memorials and townships and things named after Custer all over the country, and I was curious why he would have such a lasting legacy, but in my opinion it would be like, I don't understand why you would name a town or a state park after a war criminal. It'd be like having Dick Cheney National Monument. We all know what that would look like. So anyway, that's my opinion on Custer, but that is a more accurate history lesson of how the West was, let's not say won, how the West was taken. So again, if you feel you learned something, if you're like, wow, Leah, way to bike 37 miles uphill today, and you would like to show your support again, you can do so by donating at lakotaway.org. If you want to do like a mile for mile, again, I did 37 today, and you could sponsor me for day one, and that would be awesome. Or you can round it up to 40. Your call. So, as always, appreciate you. We're going to have a couple more history lessons tomorrow evening after we tackle another 25 to 50 miles. We'll see how my quads are doing. So thanks for tuning in for Leah's history lessons, and I appreciate you. And again, like, follow, support, share. Thank you immensely. And time to carb up for tomorrow. All right. Thanks, friends. Bye. All of the CBD.